and thanks for tuning in to this third installment in a series of programs conducted by the ODAC to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Title IX. My name is Myra Sims. I was the Director of Athletics at 2 different ODAC institutions and coached at a couple of other institutions previous to that. I'm joined today by 2 of the most esteemed colleagues I had in my time in the ODAC, 2 women that I greatly admire and respect. And I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves before we get started.
Well, I'm going to defer to Jan, so take it away, Ms. Hathorn.
I'm Jan Hathorn. I am the Director of Athletics at Washington and Lee. And I started at Washington and Lee in 1987 as the women's soccer and women's lacrosse coach, and have been athletic director here since 2007.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Jan. My name is Joanne Renn, and I am with the Executive Director Emeritus from Virginia Wesleyan University. I started at Virginia Wesleyan College in 1992 as a part-time men's and women's tennis coach, and was so fortunate as to work there for the last 28 years, and finished as the Executive Director in Athletics and retired in June of 18. Was called back to service during the pandemic, and retired again in June of 20. So I am now fully retired, hopefully.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining today. So obviously this is the 50th anniversary of the passage of Title IX. It happened in 1972, and we were joking earlier before we got on the live broadcast as to how old we all were in 1972. But all of us have come up in the era before, during, and after Title IX. So I wanted to jump right in and ask each of you to talk a little bit about just how you've seen access to leadership positions for women change over the time that you've been involved with collegiate athletics.
You know, I want to start in part because Joanne was one of the first in our league to be an athletic director. And she's been a first in a lot of ways, and it has changed dramatically in the last 10 years across our division. Until sort of that key first person goes. So when Joanne became an AD, I felt like it opened a lot of doors within our conference, opened people's eyes to the possibilities and the opportunities that are there for women. It has been interesting to see that it's so much more normal to have a woman be named an athletic director, whether it's the first one or the next one. To me, the real test is going to be wonderfully, Virginia Wesleyan hired another woman. The real test for me is after a woman retires, do they hire another woman? Right. So I think we've grown in this way in Division III in particular. And I also feel like people like Joanne are the reason why people like myself are in a position that I'm in, because it takes somebody to be sort of that ceiling breaker or the first in line. And I'm really proud of our conference in this way in particular.
Well, Jan, you're more than gracious concerning my situation. I have been so fortunate to have male role models that were solid in every sense of the word, starting with my athletic director at Old Dominion University, Dr. Jim Jarrett, who saw, for lack of a better phrase, the writing on the wall for women, and wanted Old Dominion to be in the forefront with especially scholarships and opportunities. And while that was not a significant amount of money at that time in 1973 for us, it was less than $1,000 a semester for me to go full time as a grant and aid athlete.
Wow.
And I can remember sitting in my psychology class, and it's when the professors actually called the roll, and he didn't call my name, and I raised my hand, and I got to be in a panic, and I said, he goes, "You're not on my class roster, Joanne." I said, "Well, I need to be. I need this class." And he goes, "You're not in it." So I literally ran back to the health and PE building crying in Dr. Jarrett's office and said, I'm not on anybody's roster. I'm not in school. He goes, well, we'll solve that. And what had happened was the women's grant and age were not processed. They thought it was a mistake. The university thought it was a mistake. And Dr. Jarrett took out his checkbook and wrote a check for me.
Wow.
And paid my tuition. He says, we'll get it straight. And then just really fast forward quickly into Don Forsythe at Virginia Wesleyan, who did not give me the women's basketball job because I didn't have a master's. But it went to a woman, and she and I were very good friends. We're still very good friends. Val Kepner, who's the financial aid dean at Oberlin. And when she left, he gave me a chance because I was in the process of getting my master's. And Billy Greer, my president, gave me a chance. Right there, you have three men, because we had a paucity of female role models. There weren't any. So again, Jan, it's not me. I just have been so fortunate to be in a place and a time that I got the opportunity where, and that is the big word for Title IX, the opportunities were now presented for us where they weren't before Title IX.
Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, I'm not here because of me necessarily, but more along the lines of men like Mike Walsh, who, when I became an assistant AD, he put me on every committee he could put me on because he wanted me to know people across campus and for them to know me. And so then when Tom, his last name ran right out of my head, but he was our provost. And when it came time to announce and pick the athletic director, he picked me, right? And it's both those men were people who were in my corner whenever I was a part of anything across campus, or they needed someone to literally, I would just get emails and say, what do you think about this as a woman in the athletics department?
Right.
Because there were only so many of us, right? So I agree with you totally that if it weren't for the support and men who saw our potential and our skills and knew that we could do the work.
Right.
I don't know if I'd be here or we'd be here. And so there's a lot to be grateful for there.
Let's talk a little bit about what obstacles you faced in the transition from coaching to administration, or once you've been a female in a leadership role.
I think for me, it's been, I think Jan touched on it a little bit a second ago about people believing in you, and setting you up to succeed versus setting you up to fail, or maybe expecting you to fail. And then it would be like, well, I told you they couldn't do it. And I think that's, again, way back, again, I give my parents the credit that, they wanted me to be they trained me to be an adult. They didn't treat me as a child. They expected me to have the wherewithal to make the decisions. And if decisions were bad, they would, say, you need to improve on that area, but not put you down, but rather try to build you up in every single situation. And for me, as a very young administrator, not trained at all, I was a psychology and music major. I hardly took PE classes. I didn't play high school sports because I was in the band, and there wasn't anything offered anyway. So when I got to the college situation, because I played with every guy in the neighborhood, every sport I could play when I wasn't fluting, then, that opportunity again was there. So the challenges for me was just getting people to believe I could do the job, and having, again, the word opportunity presented to me so I could do it.
Yeah. I think the challenges of going from a coach in an internally becoming an athletic director has its own set of challenges, just because you're no longer the colleague in the way that you want to be, right? So the challenge was personal for me, just that I'm a different person to them now. And so when they talk to me, it's different. And so one of the greatest challenges was feeling very isolated because my buddies could be my buddies to a degree, but not anymore either, you know?
Right.
So I was unprepared for that. I had thought I was prepared, but I wasn't. And it's not necessarily super negative. It was just one of those sort of surprising residual effects of getting the job. I like to tell the story, and this is just sort of an example of some of the challenges I've had of sitting around the table with a group of men, because we're trying to make a decision about a facility and a sport, and so there's alums at the table, there's coaches at the table, there's campus administrators at the table, and we're talking and everybody's talking, everybody's saying what they think should be happening. And at one point I just had to literally interrupt, and I said, well, as the director of athletics, this is how we want to use the facility and how it's going to benefit these sports, right? And not one of those people in that room is anybody who doesn't think I can do this job. They just didn't realize that they're all talking over me. Mm-hmm. Or that they weren't giving me a chance to talk, or they weren't looking at me to say, what do you think? Or as the director, and I'm pretty sure if I was a male, they would have asked me right away, right? It's not necessarily something that in the moment you're like, oh, you just deal with it.
Right.
And then later you think about it and you're like, oh man, it's just like, really? But at the same time, I think, I will speak for myself, but I bet this is probably true for you, Joanne, is those things don't keep you down, right? It's in part because it's not that much different from how things were all along. I mean, I had 4 brothers. I grew up in a very male type of home, and played sports with any group of men or women I could play a sport with. I mean, that's probably true for all of us. And just stuff happens, and it can hurt for a minute, and then you go on, because it's like, I know I'm going to do this. Like, I want to do this. I know I'm going to do this.
And I think that's an advantage, though, from our age group. And I know, Myra, you're the baby of the group, and we won't dwell on ages too much. But I think it's an advantage for us versus the young administrators now, because once Title IX came in and was adopted and accepted, then it got better. It got incremental. It wasn't like from 0 to 90 or 0 to 100. It was a very slow process, excruciatingly slow in a lot of areas, especially with funding and facility usage and that sort of thing that I experienced. But I think the young administrators now want it now, and they all want it, and they haven't developed. And I'm just kind of projecting, I don't know this to be true, but they haven't developed that sense of it's okay to stumble a little bit, because they haven't had the chance. They haven't stumbled. They've never stumbled. They've never experienced what we experienced growing up, which was basically nothing. Until we had the opportunities, and somebody saw that and gave those opportunities to us. So in some respect, I think our trials and tribulations are very much different than the new administrators, say the U40s, the U35s that are growing up and coming into our profession, and which frankly now could be a little bit more challenging for them because of the monetary rewards that we now experience that were not being experienced at a very young age. And I think that's encouraging men. And Myra, you touched on it before we started. The issue with having more male coaches coaching the females now than we had when we were growing up. I mean, it's like 90% when I grew up. That's all we had was female coaches.
Right.
Yeah,
and I want to come back to that. Something Jan said reminded me of an incident that happened a couple of years, maybe 3 years into my first director of athletics position. We had an opening for a coach in one of our major men's sports, and I remember that there was a lot of interest in that search among our alumni. And our president, with whom I had a great relationship, a lot of mutual respect and trust, let me know that an alum from that sport had asked him, and I quote here, "Are you going to let that woman AD hire our next coach?" And the president was sharing that with me because I guess he wanted me to understand kind of what the landscape was, which I knew, but also to affirm his support and trust in me to handle that search and that selection. So, but it just reminds me, Jan, of what you said, the ways in which, you know, women sometimes are just, the assumption is that we can't do the job for some people. And obviously there's a whole lot of folks out there. My experience has been that internally within the institutions I've worked, there's usually good support. A lot of times it's more alums who are not used to working day to day in college athletics and having women in those roles. So I want to go back to what Jan mentioned, this whole phenomenon that we've seen since Title IX in a reduction in the number of women in coaching, the percentage of women's teams coached by women, and what are the implications for women gaining administrative positions as a result of that? What other pipelines other than coaching have you seen become more prominent in more recent years?
Well, I'll start by saying that we have men who coach women's teams, and I have great faith in their ability to coach women's teams. And I also believe that women should coach women, and I also think women should coach men. And I'm excited about the fact that there's a sort of a trend. I think it's a trend. I hope it becomes just sort of a normalized thing that, you know, if a woman wants to be a coach for a men's team, that even if it's an assistant, you know, that they'd get hired because they're just as qualified. They just are a woman. So I'm trying to say a couple of things here. Number one is it's really important to me, and I try to, we have been trying to build the number of women in our department since I became the athletic director. And we work at such a place where, you know, people don't leave readily. So it's incremental, as Joanne said, and it's going to take some time. Wonderfully, within that group of women in this department, they are all about that as well. And so they're looking for women to be their assistants whenever possible, right? And in some sports, there's lots of women who are interested in those positions. And in other sports, it's harder. But I guess I'm trying to say that within the last few years, there's been this real recognition and sort of becoming more normalized that, yeah, we want a woman coaching a woman's team if at all possible, and if they're the most qualified person, right? And I think there's a lot of very qualified women who are out there to be hired. Some of what the issue is that they apply differently to positions than men do. And what I mean by that, and I think you both know this, is, you know, if there's 10 things that are characteristics or qualities that they want in a head coach, a woman, if she's not all 10, won't apply, but a man, if he's 2, will. Right. So, well, I've played basketball and I've coached before, so I can apply for this job. Well, I think a male or a female should do that way. But a lot of women are like, well, I haven't done this, or I haven't done this, or I haven't done enough of this. And I say that in part because I'm of that same mindset. As I've gotten older, I'm less that way. But you know, it's like, I'm not sure I can do that because I haven't done all of it before. And it's like, well, I hadn't done all of an athletic director's job, and here we are, right? And I had never really been a coach till I was given the opportunity, but you've done enough of it and you're capable enough in some ways. And so what we've been trying to do at Washington and Lee in particular is try to encourage some of our younger coaches who are looking to at some point become a head coach, who are women, to like, you can't turn down a job you didn't apply for. And so if you think you're interested, apply for it. You may not have all the qualities, but you might be the person they are waiting for. And we as women have to encourage women, I think, on a much greater scale to be okay with, I'm not all the things they're looking for, but I am qualified for this job, in part because I believe in myself enough that I can do this job, right? So I think it's a really important time we're in to regain some ground with women in coaching.
Jan, those are all great points, and I completely agree with you. I've been so proud of what's been happening at Wesleyan since I've left. We've replaced our men's, the director of men and women's tennis was a male. He left to go to another school, and we hired a female to take over as director of men's and women's tennis.
Mhm.
She's a fabulous young coach. She's played Division I tennis. She just really good person.
Mhm.
Same thing happened with track and field, men and women's track and field. We lost a male to that, went to another school, and we promoted from within the assistant coach. She's minority female. She's fabulous. I
Mhm.
mean, gung ho about everything. And so I'm very excited about that. We also replaced Liz Hootie with a minority female for women's basketball. So I think it's, you know, for us at Wesleyan, I really have applauded the way it's been moving for them. But like you, Jan, we've got some really great men coaching women who have been there a long time. Jeff Bowers comes to mind. He's just, you know, Jeff is like a brother to me. He's just a fabulous young man who really appreciates his women and understands what is necessary to be a really good coach for the women, and treats them with a high degree of respect. And he gets it back. I mean, he really has done well in that job. And you all have had men in those positions.
Brian Snyder is still volleyball coach, and he's exactly like that, you know, and he's like a brother to me as well. And I have no qualms about that. Right. If and when Brian decides to retire, what would we do? Well, we're going to look for a woman if we can, you know.
Yeah.
It all depends on the pool, of course, but this is my biggest point is we have to start encouraging women as women who are in the roles to start taking the roles and applying for the roles and supporting each other. You know, and I think within our league, we're really good at that. We support each other. There are leagues where, you know, I don't want to say leagues, but there are times where women don't support women. And it's not helping the cause, you know? And I just think that's the youngest people among us who are women interested in athletics. We've got to be saying, go for it, go for it, go for it.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's somebody, in those cases, do you think it's an agenda driven for them? You think it's it should be out of mutual respect, but I don't know why that would be. That didn't even cross my mind as something to do.
Right. I agree. I'm not exactly sure. And I don't know. I just think it's easy to be quick to judge. And I just think people make assumptions and judgments based on things that maybe aren't whole information. And it's just human nature. And I don't know why women do that to each other. I'm so proud to be a member of the Women Leaders in College Sports, because it's the last thing that group does. There were 1,200 women at the convention this year.
Wow.
Now that and it's all about the we're in this together.
Yeah.
And I think groups like that and leadership like Patty has for that group, and then those of us around it going out into our spaces and leading also, and doing it with that same positive, come one, come all, try it, go for it, let's do this. I think that's changing the narrative. And I just think it takes a group of women deciding that they're going to change the tone of it. And that to me is what I think is happening.
I'm so glad you mentioned Women Leaders in College Sports, Jan. I think that's an important organization, and I would really encourage young women looking for the opportunity to progress, to really get involved with that group. Unfortunately, I think we're at the end of our time, and I know we have a lot more that we could talk about, pontificate upon, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to close it down. I've really appreciated the chance to see your faces, Joanne and Jan.
Thank you.
Miss you both. Miss seeing you in the meetings, and thank you so much for all your words of wisdom today. Take care.
Thank you, Myra. Thank you, Joanne.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
It's a pleasure.